There are an awful lot of people who are afraid to death of the Federal Reserve. They're afraid to even push them.
Fed at any time. The way the Fed gets its money is it prints it.
Absolutely, but the money they're printing is our currency.
Yeah. You can't turn the control of the printing presses over to the elected bodies in countries. It just doesn't work, and that's why we set up the Fed to begin with, so you'd have that independent exercise of authority and decision-making over how you print money.
That we have to have disclosure to the American people. Second part, where we audit. I've been trying to get the Fed audited for, I've been here 23 years, for 22 years. And there are an awful lot of people who are afraid to death of the Federal Reserve. They're afraid to even push them.
This amendment, surprising though it may be, is being co-sponsored by Senator Bunning. We're working together on this. Mr. Chairman, you may recall that when Doug Elmendorf, the director of CBO, came before this committee, he testified that the Federal Reserve has committed nearly $2.3 trillion in taxpayer money to deal with the financial crisis, with the potential for this taxpayer assistance to grow to at least $4.5 trillion. Since Dr. Elmendorf's testimony, the Fed has announced that it will be lending even more money to financial institutions. Congress did not vote to directly authorize the Fed to spend any of this money. Not one debate, to the best of my knowledge, has been held in Congress on whether the Fed should be exposing the American taxpayers to more than $2.2 trillion in risk. And to this date, we still do not know exactly which companies are receiving this assistance and how much they are receiving. $2.2 trillion. When Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve, testified in front of this committee, he told us that the Fed had provided loans, and I quote, to hundreds and hundreds of banks, end quote, but refused to name any of these banks or how much assistance they provided to each bank. And to my mind, that's pretty unacceptable. I think most people throughout this country, if they know that over $2 trillion of their money are at risk, I think they might like to know who is receiving that money, what the terms are. The amendment that I am providing today, along with Senator Bunning, would simply create a deficit-neutral reserve fund, and Senator Feingold is also a co-sponsor. I'm sorry, Senator Feingold. The amendment I'm providing today with Senator Bunning and Senator Feingold would simply create a deficit-neutral reserve fund to require the Fed to publish on its website the following information with respect to all loans and other financial assistance it has provided since March 24, 2008, when it rescued Bear Stearns. Number one, the identity of each business, individual, or entity that the Fed has provided financial assistance to. Two, the type of financial assistance provided to that business or individual. Three, the value or amount of that financial assistance. Four, the date the financial assistance was provided. Five, the specific terms of any repayment expected. Six, the specific rationale for providing assistance in each instance. Seven, an audit of the Fed. That is where we are at on this amendment. Bottom line is the Fed plays an enormously important role in the financial matters of this country. We need some transparency, and I would hope that my colleagues would support this amendment.
Time in opposition?
I have to, although I was ambivalent on the amendment before, I strongly oppose this amendment. I can't.
John, is your mic on?
It is. I'll speak more directly into it, Senator. You know, the Congress set up the Federal Reserve for the purposes of keeping monetary policy separate from fiscal policy. And we have displayed, and regrettably I'm afraid this budget just simply confirms it, that we're not too good at managing fiscal policy. And we're certainly not too good at managing a lot of issues that are complex and difficult. And we've got enough of them on our plate as it is. For us to start trying to take a more direct role in managing the day-to-day decisions made by the Federal Reserve or demanding that they do this or demanding that they do that, even if it is in the name of good governance and transparency, is, I think, stepping on a slippery slope. And I think one of the great strengths of our nation is that we have kept our monetary policy separate from our fiscal policy, that the Federal Reserve has over the years protected the value of the dollar and sees that as its primary responsibility, along with the fighting inflation. And I just don't think that we have either the track record or really the structure which should allow us to try to get into this area. I think we're opening the door to, we're opening Pandora's box if we start putting the Congress into the process of dealing with the Fed. Yeah, I know that there are others who disagree with that, but I feel strongly about that, so I would oppose this amendment.
Let me just say that I frankly think the policy that Senator Sanders is calling for here is pretty hard to oppose. This is public money, taxpayers' money, being put into private institutions. And, you know, I've listened to the argument, and I've had it made to me by those who oppose the unveiling of the names of people who have received these funds on the basis that it would have a chilling effect on people's or institutions' acceptance of these funds. Well, maybe it would. Maybe that would be a good thing. But I just don't know how one can argue that it ought to be kept secret who's receiving taxpayer money.
Well,
I don't know how that can be argued.
first off, it's not directly taxpayer money unless they inflate the economy and then affect the taxpayer as a result of that. Actually, the Fed pays us money, or has up until this year paid us money on an annual basis on the basis of what they've done. And we don't put money into the Fed. The Fed produces their own revenues and produces their own money. But independent of that, because that's a technical point, I don't think it goes to the essence of your point, which is legitimate, which is, you know, how can we not demand that some entity that's doing trillions of dollars of activity and has stepped into the market the way they had should not disclose that activity. And I guess my bottom line is, yeah, that's good governance in theory, but what's really bad governance is to unleash populism on monetary policy. Nations that do that tend to get into really bad shape very quickly because you can't turn the control of the printing presses over to the elected bodies in countries. It just doesn't work, and that's why we set up the Fed to begin with, so you'd have that independent exercise of authority and decision-making over how you print money.